You are here this morning as we continue this series together on on producing and produce and all the wordplay that can come with that. And again, glad you're here. We got things going on in here, which is great. Seats are a whole different situation, and it's throwing me off probably more than you. It just feels weird. But anyways, glad you found a seat. I'm not sure if you're in your assigned seats or not. Some of you have moved places. And you're throwing me off because you have your assigned seats, and I don't know what we're doing right now. Wow, I'm gonna send out the seating chart. I'm gonna have to send it out again, and you'll have to know who your buddy is and who you're sitting next to from here on out. Wow, this is real weird. But glad you're here as we continue this together. And I don't know if you ever had like that verse, these verses that were just read for us by Billy. And it's cool because guys, guess what? Billy can read, and that was great. So we're doing good. It's a big day. But if I don't know if that's true. There's a line in New Girl where Nick Miller says, "I don't know if I can read. I think I just memorized a lot of words." And sometimes I think that's true of me too. Like I'm not sure if I read or just memorized a lot of words. But anyways, glad that you're here for this because this is a weird verse, right? Jesus, one of the weirdest miracles he ever performs. If we're paying attention to the miracles, it's the only destructive miracle he ever performs. He comes in and he looks at a fig tree. He's hangry and he says, this thing needs to die, and just lets it die. That's what he does. That's the end of the story. Weird story. It kind of doesn't fit in what you might think of with a series about produce and producing things. But I don't know if you ever had a surprise inspection like this before. You ever had somebody kind of pays attention and tells you about how your performance is, what things are like. I remember one time specifically, I've shared before, that I had an intern who came to me one time. I was working at a big church in Washington State, and I had this intern who came to me. He was a college student. He said, "I'd like to intern under you. I'd like to work at the church and intern for you." And I was like, "Well, that'd be cool." And I said, so we sent some emails back and forth, and I kind of said, "I'd love to meet you in person. I'd love to have kind of an interview with you. Make sure it's a good fit for you. Make sure it's a good fit for us." So we set up this interview, and we go and we meet at a coffee shop because that's all there is in the Pacific Northwest. There is no other thing there but coffee shops. And so I walk up to this coffee shop, and I go in, and I meet this fella, and his name is RJ, and I go to shake his hand. I said, "It's great to finally meet you." And he said, "No, we've met before." I was like, "We have?" He was like, "Yeah, we met just a few months ago." I said, "I'm so sorry, I don't remember that." He goes, No, you wouldn't have remembered it." He said, "You came to a shoe store that I was working at in the mall." And he said, "I was working there, and you came in to buy your wife, you came with her to buy her some Ugg boots." Does anyone remember the Ugg boot phase that was crazy at the time? It was the sweater Ugg boots. And so we walk in to go get these Ugg boots, and he said, "I was your salesman. And I was there the whole time." I said, "Well, you should introduce yourself. I would have loved to have met you then." He goes, "No, I didn't want to introduce myself." He said, "I wanted to see how you acted. I wanted to see if you were really the same person I saw on the stage, if that was the same person I would see in real life, how you acted with your wife, with your with the people around you, how you really act." He said, "Because sometimes I've seen some pastors who aren't exactly all they say they are." He said, "So I just kind of wanted to see how it went." And so I was like, "Well, I'm assuming by this conversation that things went okay." And he was like, yeah, things were great." And I was like, man, it terrified me. I don't know if, that was one of the scariest moments of my life, was somebody telling me that. I don't know if you ever had this happen, it's like an undercover boss situation. It was so scary to me. I was like, wow, people are watching. And they're paying attention. There's a surprise inspection, right? This whole thing is kind of scary to me, that people are watching and they're seeing if my life is actually producing anything, if there's actually anything that's there, or if it's all persona. Right? A lot of us, if we're being honest, in the culture we live in, we have lives that are really not based around actually producing anything. We're so wrapped up with lives of persona or of just production. It's a production that we put on, right? We put out these things where it's this is the personality I'm cultivating, right? So my personality that I'm cultivating around these people, that's who I want to be for them. But it might change with other people. Or I want to put on this persona, especially social media, we're big on this, right? Where we put out this persona of this is who I am to the world, and I like that idea, right? But it's not who I really am, it's just the persona that I'm building. And so it's a production of who I want to look like. It's a production for the world. I had a lady just this week, I was doing interviews for a position for a job that I was hiring for. I was down in Fort Lauderdale hiring for this position, and there was this lady who had sent in a resume, and she had sent in this whole resume, and on it was a bunch of social media links, especially about her LinkedIn and stuff. So I had checked out her LinkedIn before I went because I thought I should probably know what she looks like. You know what I mean? It's awkward meeting somebody you've never met before, so I should make sure I know who she is and what she looks like. And so I checked out her LinkedIn, and she showed up to the interview, And I'll be honest, I did not recognize her at all. Like, no idea. She walked up, introduced herself, and I was like, I don't think that's correct. That's not the person that I saw. And I said, I made a joke. I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you from your LinkedIn profile. And she goes, oh, yeah, that picture. And I was like, and I thought maybe it was just an old picture, like maybe she had used one when she was younger, something like that, because who doesn't do that occasionally, right? And I was like, maybe it's just a younger picture. And she goes, oh, that's an AI-generated picture of me. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. I was like, that's cool. And she goes, I asked AI to say what I would look like if I was merged with Demi Moore. And I was like, well, here we are. Okay. She did not get the job. I just just putting it out there. It was wild. And I was like, this persona that we build, right? We're all busy on this. We build the persona. We put this stuff out there, but it's all just production of what we want to look like to the world, but it's not actually sometimes doing anything or producing anything real within us. This is all facade. This is all makeup. This is all just a projection to the world, but it is not producing anything in the world. Here's what's interesting. I believe this, but if we were to actually follow Jesus, if we were to actually do what Jesus says, I actually believe it would produce things into this world. He says that his way, the way of following Jesus, will actually produce us to be people more of love, which I don't know if any of us can agree with this, but as a person who follows Jesus, you should be looking more like a person who is loving than you did the day you started following Jesus. Like, if you've been doing this for a while, you should look more loving, not less, as you progress in your relationship with Jesus. Seems to be his command. Remember, somebody asked him, like, what's the greatest command? He says, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If I was to boil down everything that I want in this world, those are the two things I would say are most important. I believe that if you're a person following Jesus, we should be producing, your life has the potential in this world to produce peace into this world. To make more peace, not more anger, not more frustration, not more friction in this world, but to create more peace in this world. Your life has the potential to do that if it's producing correctly. Jesus says that your life has the potential to produce into this world more of the kingdom of heaven. That this world would look more like heaven because you are in it and you're producing fruit. But what happens, I think a lot of us stop short of that because we just get into the production mode of making everything look right instead of actually producing any real fruit with our lives. I think that's what happens a lot of times. If you've ever read, Brennan Manning had a great book. This is a while back, but it was called The Ragamuffin Gospel. If you're not familiar with it, one of the best books, really eye-opening on just what the church could be if it was at its best and what it could produce. And he wrote this. He said, the temptation of the age is to look good without being good. I think many of us, we can fall into that if we're not careful. And that's exactly what Jesus does. He doesn't want to look at people's profiles or their personas. That's weird. He just wants to see production within our lives. That's what this story is about. So if you go into Matthew, you're welcome to turn there. Just keep a finger in Matthew because we're going to kind of skip around a little bit here. But in Matthew chapter 21, what's happened? Jesus is in the temple. He's coming to the temple from riding in on the donkey that we all know that story. He rides in on this donkey. He comes to Jerusalem. He's in the temple. He's going to do some of his last teachings. But right when he does that, and there's a couple things we'll come back and kind of zoom out on this, by the way, and kind of zoom back in a little bit. But it says this in verse 18. This early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. So just a hungry guy. He's just going back to the city. He has apparently left the city for some reason and coming back into the city. And as he goes back into the city, just notice the city he's going to is Jerusalem. He's going towards the temple. That's what he's looking for. He will spend the next few chapters teaching in the temple in Jerusalem. So he's looking at Jerusalem's temple as he comes back into the city. It says, seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it but found nothing on it except leaves. That's all he found. There's no figs, there's just leaves. And then he says to it, may you never bear fruit again. And immediately the tree withered. Now, you may have family members or people in your life who are the hangry people. You know who I'm talking about. You have to elbow each other. It's cool because you'll probably get in trouble for it. But there's usually that person in your family who gets really hangry. right? And you have to be like constantly kind of feeding them. And if they get a little cranky, the first question is like, have you eaten in a little while? You know what I'm saying? And then you kind of get in trouble for asking that question. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Yeah. Next week we'll do some marriage counseling, apparently. We're going to have to do some reconciliation work here. But yeah, I mean, like, it's crazy. Like, there are people like this. Jesus apparently has this issue because he gets real mad. Like, he just gets angry, curses the fig tree, and kills it because he was hungry. That's the only reason we get, is because he was hungry. Now, if you flip over, and you don't have to do this, but in Mark chapter 11, the same story comes up. In Mark chapter 11, actually, by the way, of all the miracles of Jesus, there's only like a handful of miracles. I think it's about 33%, like about a third of all the miracles that are documented in all three gospels, like of the synoptic gospels. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, only a few of the miracles, only about a third of the miracles are documented in all three. This miracle, of all the miracles, is documented in all three, which is really weird. But it tells us this. In chapter 11 of Mark, it says the next day as they were leaving, this is the way they say it, Mark says, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. Now, in leaf means that it was not going to have fruit. In leaf actually means that it was getting ready to bear fruit, but it was not yet ready to bear fruit. That's literally what it means. And Jesus even goes up to it and says, when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. So maybe Jesus is just really bad at knowing anything about agriculture. Maybe that's our issue, right? It's not even season. Why is he so worried about this? If you don't know, like, fig trees are a really weird breed of things, but they only produce 2 or 3 fruits a year, first of all, like total. They don't produce a lot. They're not known for a lot of produce. And secondly, they only produce about 2 months of the year. 10 months of the year, they do not produce anything. And so he shows up there, and there's this little thing there called the takash. And the takash is this fruit before the fruit. It's the leaves that come showing there will be fruit. The takash shows there's going to be fruit, but there's not yet fruit. And Jesus gets there and sees that, and all he sees is a bunch of leaves. He sees no produce, no actual fruit on the vine. Nothing's actually come out of this yet. But there's a lot of looking like something's going to happen. There's a lot of production. There's just no actual produce. And Jesus, because of that, he gets really angry because it's all leaves. There's no fruit. And he curses it. It actually says, then it says right after that, he said to the tree, may no one, not just me, may no one ever eat from you again. I don't want you doing this to anybody else. May no one ever eat from you again. And his disciples heard him say it. I don't know what that line means, but it kind of feels like a rap battle like thing or something like, oh, no, he didn't. You know, like, I don't know, like it's a big thing. Like, and they even heard him even say it. And then if you go down a little bit in the chapter, verse 20, it says, in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. And Peter remembered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. Because Peter is always Captain Obvious. Like, we already saw it die. I don't know what is important about this. This miracle is so bizarre that it takes up so much real estate of this weird, it's again a destructive miracle. Jesus does no other destructive miracle in the entire Bible. So what's the deal with this fig tree? What's happening here? What Jesus is doing is a performance art. Now, if you've read through the Old Testament, you know that there's a lot of performance art going on. In the Old Testament, you see a lot of prophets who do this kind of thing, right? They do like these weird things that you're like, why are we doing this, right? Do you remember? Like, there's a whole story of Isaiah where he walked around barefoot and naked for 3 years. And I don't know what Isaiah looked like. I don't know if that was, but there's some beaches in Florida that he could have lived on. But yeah, he was homeless, like he was barefoot, he was naked, and he would walk around for 3 years that way. If you remember, there's a whole story of when Ezekiel, remember, he would tighten his belt. He would lay on his left side. He laid on his left side for 390 days, and then flipped to his right side for 40 days and just laid there, like in the middle of the city, to kind of show the sin of the culture and to make this performance out of something. There's even one story of Jeremiah where he buried his underwear in the ground and came back for it a few days later and took it back up to show, like, I don't even really know what the point was. Honestly, maybe he's just out of detergent. I don't know. But he put it down. This is gonna be the next series, by the way. We're just gonna do this. But like he just put it down on the ground, then buried it and took it back up to show the sin of the world and of the Israelite culture. So there's like performance art that would happen. A lot of people think that what Jesus is doing here is this prophetic performance art of showing something else that's going on. When he does this, it's kind of a big deal. And when he does it, he's really pointing back all the way to Genesis, but through the scripture. So if you go back, like if you look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, it says that Adam and his wife were both naked. They felt no shame. We know this bit. And God puts them in a garden where they are allowed to eat of all the fruit, all the produce of the garden, including the fig trees. They're allowed to eat of the fruit of it, but they're not allowed to use it for other things, apparently. Because what happens, if you remember in chapter 3, we see there was a woman that was convinced. She saw that there was a tree that was beautiful. The fruit looked delicious. She loves the produce of it, the fruit, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit, she ate it, and then she gave some to her husband who was with her. He's right there. He ate it too. If you remember, right after this, he blames it on Eve. Adam blames it on Eve. He says, the woman you gave me made me eat the fruit, is what he says. The woman you gave me, which I'm sure is just the beginning of marital strife. And then he says that at that moment, their eyes were open and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. This is the first time they felt shame. And what do they use? They sew together fig leaves from a fig tree to cover themselves. For the first time, they felt what shame felt like. And they used this fig leaf as a way of producing something that would cover over what was really going on within them. They were feeling shame internally, but they used these fig leaves to cover that shame. I remember we had a friend who was a pastor with me on staff at a church at one point, and she was a very conservative gal. She came out of a Nazarene church, very conservative, and she was older than I am, and had been in ministry for a long time. Sweet, sweet lady. And she was so conservative. I remember one time she said the word sexy in front of me, and she was talking about tea. And what I mean by that is literally, she said, I think Earl Grey is a sexy tea. That's what she said. And she blushed, like she turned bright red, because she's never said the word sexy before, I think, in her life. And we were talking about tea, which was even weirder. And I remember she went down to this restaurant. Have you ever heard of Pete and Shorty's down on there's one on 60. There's one over in Pinellas Park, too. And at Pete and Shorty's, there's a restaurant that as you walk through the women's room in this restaurant, there's this portrait of the statue of David, of Michelangelo's David. And over the part of David, there's a fig leaf there. And if you lift the fig leaf, an alarm sounds in the rest of the restaurant. And so we were at the restaurant, and sweet Molly goes into the bathroom. She's the only one in there. And all of a sudden an alarm goes off. And then Molly comes walking out, and she is blushing, knowing that she just got caught for lifting up the fig leaf out of curiosity. What she told me was she was afraid the painting was messed up, that somebody put that on there on accident, and she was just taking it off, to preserve the painting, is what she told me. I don't think that's true. I think curiosity got her. Just as a heads up for all of you, if you go there, just know that'll set off the alarm. Either that means you shouldn't go there because you'll get in trouble, or you have friends you need to take there. One of the two. And she felt, it's funny because even Molly, at that moment, this fig leaf brought shame to her life. There is shame now suddenly. You feel this shame just because that's what sin does. Sin creates a byproduct of shame. It always does. And we see it immediately. They cover themselves because they're afraid of what shame brings. Again, Brene Brown, who is not a Christian researcher, she's just a researcher on emotion. Brene Brown defines shame as this: the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. It's something we've all experienced, or we've done, or failed, or something, and that's what makes us unworthy of connection. When we've done something or something, we've had something happen in our lives that makes us think that we're not worthy of connection anymore. And that's what they felt. And so they took these leaves, and instead of doing what the right thing would have been, they cover themselves because they're so nervous about their shame. And they put this production in place to say like, hey, let's not focus on these other things. Let's just focus on what we're doing right here. And we hide ourselves. And a lot of times that's what this kind of persona or this personality or this production we put out there, that's what it's doing, is it's hiding us. Because we're afraid of the shame that's within us. Because we're afraid of being disconnected. And they were afraid of being disconnected from each other, but especially from God, thinking they weren't worthy. And what happens after that, if you remember, God comes along and says, no, I want to reestablish this relationship with you. Not just in the garden. He does it later on. He does it with Abraham. He shows up and says, no, I want a relationship with you. I'm not worried about that. I'll take care of the sin. I'll take care of the shame. I want a relationship with you. And then we see him do that not just with Abraham, but with Isaac and Jacob, all the sons and their forefathers. We start to see all these generations after generations where God pursues them and says, I want a relationship with you, until he shows up to the Israelites and he shows up to a whole group of people, says, I want to be the one. I'll take care of the sin. I'll take care of the shame. I just don't want this production anymore. I want to be in relationship with you. And so he creates this place called this tabernacle. In fact, in the book of Leviticus, he does a whole bunch of it. And someday, when I do a series on Leviticus, we're going to cover all this. But there's going to be a lot, because we have a lot to talk about in Leviticus someday. And someday we'll do that series. But in Leviticus, remember, he takes them to a temple and he says, this is the meeting place of heaven and earth. This is where the two things come together. They are shared in one location in this temple. That's the goal here. And he restores the relationship, saying this is where it will be restored. It's all going to happen in here. And you don't need your fig leaves. That's not what this is for. This is for us to have a real relationship with one another. And then from there on, he starts to uses this archetype of the fig tree as a symbol for Israel. He starts to talk about them in terms of the fig tree. And you can see it happen. Joel covers it in Joel chapter 1. You'll see it in Jeremiah chapter 24. In Jeremiah chapter 24, there's actually 2 baskets of figs. He goes on a whole thing about what that looks like. But you can also see it in like, for instance, if you look in Hosea chapter 9, Hosea says this, when I found Israel, this is when he's talking about what happened in Leviticus, what happened in Exodus. When I found Israel, it was like finding grapes in the desert. Like things were so good. Their hearts were so right. Everything was working. There was real fruit from them. That's what it was like. He says, when I saw your ancestors, it was like seeing the early fruit on a fig tree. That's what it was like. There was producing fruit. But when they came to Baal, they consecrated themselves to that shameful idol, and they became as vile as the thing they loved. Like then they walked away from me. And they stopped producing fruit, and they started chasing other things. Now, if you remember the story, they don't just give up on this. They continue to do religious practices, but their heart is not in it because their heart is with Baal. Their heart starts to change where it's at. And he writes, and these prophets would write about how amazing this was going to be. Someday it was all going to be restored. It was all going to be set right. And he used this fig tree image to even show what was going to happen. In fact, in the book of Micah, Micah writes the line that Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote, for when he wrote the lines for George Washington. This is the verse that he wrote. You'll get there in a second. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established at the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and people will stream to it. That's what this is going to be like. He's writing like, this is the hope of what the Israelites will be someday. Many nations are going to come and say, let's go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Right? So from Jerusalem, where Jesus was at, the temple, that's where it's all going to happen. And he will judge between many people, and he'll settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. And I love this line. It's one of my favorite lines in the entire Bible. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. What does that mean? It means they're not going to be fighting anymore. They're going to be farming. Like they don't have to fight anymore. There's going to be more peace in this place because of these people. There's going to be more love in this place because of these people. The world is going to look a lot more like the kingdom of heaven because of these people and because of their real relationship with this God, where they are the intersection. They are the intersection of heaven and earth. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. That's all over. Everyone will sit under their own vine and their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken. Some of you heard the line, didn't you? Right there. You hear the line? George Washington? Yeah, okay. Yeah, they're going to sit under their own vine and their own fig tree. And he says that's what's going to happen. It's going to be this flowering fig tree. It's going to produce fruit. Again, that's the goal here. And they're going to create this temple. And in this temple, that's where it's going to go out from Jerusalem. It's going to be this place of peace for all nations. That's what they're going to do. But what we see happen is that Jesus shows up to that same temple, and that's not what he sees at all. If you go back to Matthew, if you look back in Matthew 21 where you just were, and you look above what we just read, the section right before it, Jesus in chapter 21, verse 12, it says, Jesus entered the temple courts, and did he find this flowering fig tree? Did he find this place of peace, this place of love that was supposed to be this place for all people to see what the kingdom of heaven would look like? No. Instead, he has to drive out all who were buying and selling there. He overturns the tables and of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. Look at what he sees. He sees oppression. He sees people being hurt by a system. If you don't know what would happen in those temple courts, you would have to come in and sacrifice. You would bring a sacrifice to sacrifice in front of God. That was still a part of the Jewish tradition. However, many people couldn't bring that with them. They'd be coming from hundreds of miles. And so sometimes they would come to the temple, and instead of bringing a pigeon with them for hundreds of miles or whatever, because that'd be weird. You don't have like a cooler to put that thing in. You're carrying a pigeon. I don't know. I just can't imagine carrying a dead pigeon or even maybe a live pigeon for hundreds of miles. But if you got there, you might buy a pigeon to sacrifice, for instance, right? But when you got there, instead of those just being things you could buy in for the price that it should be, everything was extorted, everything was more expensive. And actually, most of the people were in line with the government of Rome, selling things for higher costs, giving kickbacks to Rome. In fact, like the Sadducees were making so much money off of Rome. Like recently, there was an excavation of a Sadducee's house, by the way. This is a Sadducee who would have been a religious official from Rome and the Jewish tradition. There's recently excavation of a Sadducee's house. In that house, they found a bottle of wine that at that time would have cost, in our money today, over $200,000. And that was in a Sadducee's home. Like they had that kind of money. They were extorting their own people. And Jesus walks in, and this is supposed to be the place of peace, the place of love that he has been talking about. This is where all the produce is going to come from. And instead he sees horrible religious tradition that has been skewed, that has been used as now a weapon against its own people. It's creating more oppression than it's creating freedom. It's creating more friction than it's creating peace. I guarantee you it's creating more hatred and more animosity than it's creating love towards one another. And that's what he shows up to see. And so he starts throwing things. He overturns the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. And he says, it is written to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. This is what this place was supposed to be. Sometimes I think about, I remember I used to, when I was younger, I used to take a lot of trips to Haiti. I had family that lived in Haiti almost their entire lives. I had an uncle who decided he was going to move over there as a missionary. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and after Vietnam, he decided to use his GI money to get a veterinarian doctorate. And so he learned to be a veterinarian. Well, he went to Haiti one time and saw how sick the animals were, how desperate people were, and he decided, I'm just moving over here. And so he lived in Haiti for almost 40 years. He actually lived there till he died, and he was there for a long time. So I used to go over quite a bit and visit and just kind of stop in to see things. And it was always interesting. It was always like something to see, because I don't know if you've ever been to a place like that, but it's wild. And surprisingly, you might be surprised to hear this, I don't fit in. Like when I go there, people notice that I'm there. And so it was always like kind of cool to go see what was going on. And I remember I used to fly on a cargo plane. There was cargo planes that flew out of Palm Beach where I lived. And I had a friend whose dad was a pilot for these cargo planes. And they would fly over like sheep and goats and like random animals to go over to Haiti to give them healthy livestock. And so I would just be sitting in the back of a cargo plane with like the goats and me flying over to Haiti. I don't know if that's even legal the more I've thought about it, but it was, it was pre 9/11. It was a different time. You could just walk on any plane, I think, at that time. I've watched movies since then and been like, man, you could just walk onto any flight apparently pre 9/11. And so I was flying over there a lot. And I remember when I was in high school, we drove through Port-au-Prince. And there was this big building, this huge building right in the middle of Port-au-Prince. Port-au-Prince is the capital of Haiti. And right in the middle, there was this massive, massive building they were putting together. And it was beautiful, to be honest with you. It was painted. Like you could see this building from all different corners of the city. And it was just so nice. Everything else in the city is not exactly a nice place. It's not beautiful buildings everywhere. So when one is painted like this, when one looks like this, it stands out. It's beautiful. I remember seeing it and being like, what is that thing? And there was a movie theater that was going to be put into this building. And it was this big production for the city that they were putting together a movie theater, and it was going to be a big thing. Now, I just want to be clear. In the city, like in Haiti, right now, the employment rate in Haiti, the employment, not unemployment, the employment rate in Haiti is 15%. 15% of people have a job. And that's not like full-time employment, that's just employment. So the fact they were putting it in a movie theater did seem a little weird to me, but they were so proud of it. And they were like, this thing is going to bring, and they really believed it was going to bring some kind of revitalization to the area. It was going to make the area nicer. It was going to become more touristy, so people might come into Haiti. It might revitalize their entire economy. It was the hope of the place. And I remember I flew down a few months later and saw the building again, and it looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed. And I asked about it, how's the movie theater project going? And they were like, everybody was like, yeah, it's not really moving along very fast. They keep painting the outside, but that's all we ever see them doing. And a few months later, I flew down again, and they were painting the outside again. And it turned out after years of this, that the Haitian government had embezzled $2 billion of foreign aid that had come in from different countries, and all they'd ever done was paint the outside of the building and kept telling everybody, but we're going to get to the inside soon. We're going to actually take care of the inside sooner rather than later. We're going to get there. But right now we're just going to paint the outside again and again. And said they were extorting their own people, taking money from a country that desperately needed it for this project. And it was hard not to see a little bit of, if I'm being honest with you, the church in that through my lens. Like a place that has so much potential, and people are looking at it thinking this could be the hope. This could be the answer for what we need. But all we really do is keep putting paint on the outside of the building. And what's going on inside is nothing at all. There's no life change within it. There's no people taking that seriously. There's no actual building of a church happening within it. There is a building of a church that's going up around it. And I think a lot of times this is how church is for us. It looks great. And on the outside, it's got a lot of production. You guys know as well as I do. I've lived in the mega church world. I've been a part of that. I know how the machine runs, where we're constantly just putting out production. We have to constantly make the next thing, where we have to I remember every Christmas Eve where we would have a massive Christmas Eve, it would already be 2 days later, you'd be like, what are we doing for Easter to top Christmas Eve? Then you get to Easter, and you'd be like, how do we top that for Christmas Eve again? Right? You would just constantly be on this treadmill of bigger and better and more. Meanwhile, I don't know that the spiritual growth of that church was going anywhere. The production of the church was at its highest, while the produce of the church was maybe at its lowest. That's what Jesus is talking about here. You were supposed to be the hope of the world, and yet you look just like the world around you. You were supposed to be this place where heaven and earth meet, not just within a building, but within your own body. And yet you look just like everything else. You just keep putting paint on the outside, don't you? And for many of us, and the worst part is at best, we become an entertainment venue. Church becomes an entertainment venue. At best, it's just an entertainment place. Is we come because it has the things that we're looking for, and we want it to be exactly how we want it to be, right? And we're looking for the big thing. And a fog machine's cool, but let's give ourselves a helicopter egg drop, for crying out loud. You're a real church when you drop Easter eggs out of a helicopter. But also just in general, we're so picky about how everything looks or feels, or what it has for me and how it offers things to me. And it becomes an entertainment venue. Charles Schultz, I remember Charles Schultz reading through one of his biographies. He had a quote where he said, as soon as do you remember Charles Schultz, by the way, the Peanuts author? He wrote the Peanuts. Okay. And he said, as soon as the congregation gets to the point where you are not on fairly intimate terms with every other person in that church, then you have become a theater where people can attend services. He says, I don't think you can attend a church service. Service is not something which is there to be viewed as if it were a play or a movie. But that's kind of what we do, isn't it? Especially post-COVID. Oh my goodness, if I can just watch from home, if I can just flip through the YouTube stuff, I'll be fine. And many of us, like, that's what church has become. It's the outside looking good, but there's nothing going on inside. Charles Spurgeon, by the way, was a little bit more frank about the way he put that. He says this, this was back in 88, he wrote this. A new plan is to assimilate the church to the world. Notice that. The new plan is to assimilate the church to the world and so include a larger area within its bounds. By semi-dramatic performances, they make houses of prayer to approximate to the theater. They turn their services into musical displays. They turn their sermons into political harangues or philosophical essays. In fact, they exchange the temple for the theater and turn the ministers of God into actors whose business it is to amuse men. And is that all church is? Is that all this is supposed to be? Is that all we're supposed to be? Is people who are just amused by the same thing altogether? We just want to go to the same Christian place and do the same Christian things, be amused by the same Christian stuff, but we don't want to do anything with that. We don't have to produce anything with that. We just are amused by it. This is, I think, maybe why Jesus gets so frustrated so many times with what he calls the hypocrites. If you pay attention in the New Testament, Jesus never attacks somebody who we would call a sinner or a tax collector, which is, in Jesus' words, actually just as bad as a sinner. There's a sinners and tax collectors, right? Jesus never attacks somebody who's a sinner or a tax collector. Who does he attack every time? The religious, right? The religious elite. And what does he call them time after time after time? He calls them hypocrites, right? Because they're actors. They're just playing a part. That's what they're there to do. Remember in the Sermon on the Mount, we see that Jesus talks about this multiple times. The Sermon on the Mount, Jesus in chapter 6, he says it 3 different times. Now, the way he says this, just to put it in perspective, just so you know, there were 3 things he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about fasting, he's going to talk about prayer, he's going to talk about giving to the needy. Those were your 3 practices in the church, like in the temple. So he's actually saying, like, this is your entire church service. And this is what happens. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. They've received their reward in full. Go down to chapter 6, verse 5. And when you pray, second practice, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. They love to stand in the streets, praying in synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. I truly tell you, they've received their reward in full. Or all the way down, if you go to chapter 6, verse 16. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. They disfigure their faces and show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their rewards in full. I don't know if you noticed, but there seems to be a pattern here of what he's saying. They're hypocrites and they're receiving their reward in full. But they're hypocrites. One interesting thing I would say is these hypocrites that he's talking about, they do fast, they do pray, and they do give to the needy. I would just question in the church today, how many of us at least even do those 3 practices? Fasting, praying, give to the needy. At least they're doing them. I don't even know if we're doing those. But they're doing them for their persona, for the way that they want to look to the people, to the personality they're creating, for the production of the whole thing. And Jesus seems to hate it. Jesus actually says, right, when he says hypocrites, remember the word hypokrites there in Greek. The word hypokrites is the word he's using there. And it's an actor, it's a stage player, or a pretender. That's the literal meaning of the word. An actor, a person in a theater. That's what they are. It's a person, I love the second definition. It's a person who wears a face on their face. They put a face over their own. their persona, their personality, their production. They put it over their face because they don't want to actually be seen. They don't want to change what's within. They just want to put this face over the face. And Jesus probably was pretty familiar with this. Again, remember, Jesus was a tekton. He was a worker, which meant he was not necessarily a carpenter. We always say he was a carpenter. Probably not. If you've ever been to the Middle East, you know there's not a lot of trees. There's not a lot of woodworking. There is a lot of stoneworking, a lot of labor masonry work. And what he was doing was probably a laborer for masonry. And near him, only a few miles from where Jesus grew up, was a thing called the Sepphoris, which the Sepphoris was this place that was built as a theater for the kings of the time. So it was at the time under Pontius Pilate where he built this theater. And it's believed that Jesus, probably as a young man, went with his father Joseph to go build this theater called the Sepphoris. He built there every day and probably saw this is a place that's just a stage where actors are going to come and act. But this is not what the church is supposed to be. This is not what my temple was supposed to be used for. This is not what my people are going to do, is be actors who put a face on their face. He didn't come to build theaters. He came to build the church. And that was his goal. He laid his life down for the church so that we would be people who produce love into the world, peace into the world, the kingdom of heaven into this very world. And what's scary right now is I don't know that the church is doing that. There was a study just recently from George Barna in the Barna Research Group. And they did a study, this is, I guess it's 2016, so it was a little while ago, but in 2016, they did this study looking at the sexual ethic of Christians, looking at how Christians gave their money or spent their money or were generous with their money. They looked at how Christians took kind of their moral values in different ways, different things with morality. They looked at Christians as how they would ask them a bunch of different questions that are pretty clear in the Bible. How many times have you loved, like in different ways? How many times have you like done something to care for a person in need? How many times have you gone out of your way to welcome people who are immigrants or refugees into your country? How many times have you done, again, things that we see in the Bible pretty clearly that Jesus tells us to do? How many times have you done a good Samaritan type of act? When have you done these things? And what they found was not just that, not just in what we believe, but also in how we behave. They found at the end of their research, this was the line. I won't give you all the stats, but this line was at the end of it. It said, we think and behave no differently from anyone else. We look exactly like the world around us. And so we keep doing this where we like the production part, but we don't like the actual produce part where we actually have to change things in our lives and do stuff about it. Now, I'm not here to try to give you some kind of like pointers on exactly what I think that means for you. Because I think that's too small. So I had a temptation to be like, so here's what we're going to do. We're all going to go serve and do this thing together. But I think that's too easy. I'm sorry to say that. I think that's too easy. Is for me or somebody to plan like a serving event that does the thing. Because you know what's harder? Is in your personal life, you probably have people that you need to forgive. Like, that's harder, I think. It's easier for me to put on work gloves and just go do a thing than to like roll up my sleeves and actually have to go forgive somebody. Or there's somebody that you like, you know that you have friction between you and them and you need to go make things right. Or you need to, I don't know, learn what halal food is to invite over that Afghan family that lives near you, which is something I'm dealing with. Or you need to like figure out what it is and who it is that you need to personally serve, not as a program, not as some production, but in your own life to create the produce, the kind of thing that you can create in your life. You need to figure out what that is. How can you be more generous with your time? How can you be more generous with your money? How can you take care of the poor, the people in need? How can you fast more? How could you pray more? What do those things look like for you to do in your own life that will create actual produce into this world? My hope is that you find that you are thinking about something right now, that there's something that you need to do. Because when this inspection comes along, it's pretty terrifying, isn't it? Like if Jesus were to walk by and see our church or us as individuals, what would he say? If he were to come by and see what the church has become and what's happening right now, if he was sitting in our midst, what would he say about that? Would he go out and say, you know what? This fig tree's doing just fine. Or would he curse it and say, nobody should eat from you ever again? Again, Brennan Manning, in Ragamuffin Gospel, he says this: the greatest cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him with their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. So for many of us, there's produce that we have to think about. How do we produce something with our lives? Because Jesus, again, reading that verse again in Matthew chapter 19, it says, seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it. And what would he find if he came to your life? Would he find nothing except leaves? Or would he find fruit? Would he just find production? Or would he actually find produce? So today, as we close, my hope is that, I see some of you making notes. I hope that you're making notes. I hope you're thinking about this. I have some things that I've been thinking about as wrestling through this, and we're not even done with the series. We've got a lot more to cover in this. But my hope is that you have some things that you know you need to do to make this world a place that's more loving, a place that's more peaceful, a place that looks more like the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdoms of earth. So if you would, let's stand together as we close and as we pray, and then we're going to sing together before we leave here. Let's pray.